Is this... yes, Willie Buck Merle again. Hello, Commodore Geek. Hope you're doing well. Lately, I've come across Bob Seidenstiker's excellent blog post series rationalizing away the Canaanite problem. Patheos, P-A-T-H-E-O-S, 13-0107. Bob Seidenstiker, of course, wrote Cross-Examined, I believe it is, a great novel about apologetics and stuff. And I was immediately curious if you've already covered on your show the problematic statement from Jesus to the Canaanite woman in Matthew 15:26, and also in Mark. Here's the whole passage from both gospel accounts, and this is from a Bible translation I am not familiar with, the Lexham translation, Lexham English Bible, I guess it is. Matthew 15:21-28. And departing from there, Jesus went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that district came and cried out, saying, Have mercy on... No, I can't do a Jewish one, can I? Canaanite woman, anyway. Have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is severely possessed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word, and his disciples came up and asked him, saying, Send her away, because she's crying out after us. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt down before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered and said, It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So she said, Yes, Lord, for even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, your faith is great. Let it be done for you as you want. And her daughter was healed from that hour. Mark 7:24-29. Of course, I think this is the original that Matthew rewrote. And from there he set out and went to the region of Tyre. And when he entered into a house, he wanted no one to know, and yet he was not able to escape notice. But immediately a woman whose young daughter was possessed by an unclean spirit, when she heard about him, came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by nationality, and she was asking him that he would expel the demon from her daughter. And he said to her, Let the children be satisfied first, for it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. But she answered and said to him, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And he said to her, Because of this statement, go, the demon has gone out of your daughter. I went with a clunky-ish Lexham translation here just for the sake of better accuracy, but to the point, this seems to me at best Jesus caught at a bad moment, or just a frank admission of the Jewish Jesus looking down at the other races like the chosen peeps are supposed to. Either way, it dinks with the Jesus really loves you narrative. Say, Jesus, one of those dog people that also live around here needs something. Well, I really shouldn't do it, but just this one time, since she's groveling so well. Also, what occurred to me in the Seidenstiker blog post, what if the apologist actually sees a benefit of foregoing any reason for a historical Jesus like St. Paul evidently does? I think Paul would tire very quickly of these gospel accounts, which meant nothing to the message he was trying to accomplish. How burdensome does the Old Testament racist think need to get before pushing the saucer separation button on the USS Hebrew Bible altogether? As Captain Picard would order Commander Data, make it so. Your faithful servant in Starfleet, Willie Buck Merle. I think most conservative Christians tolerate the presence of the Old Testament, though there are only certain parts of it they really like, especially what they think are messianic prophecies, which means they're kind of making pieces of the Old Testament into the New Testament, right? And the Psalms and the Proverbs, maybe. They kind of like those. The rest of it really could go to hell. They don't really care. And I can understand why. It's not a Christian book. As Randall Helms said, they kind of made it into one by rereading it and then rewriting it in the form of the New Testament in many respects. But it is more trouble than it's worth. I mean, you really declared bankruptcy when, like William Lane Craig, you say that the real problem morally with the genocidal slaughter of the Canaanites was the position God was putting the obedient Israelite soldiers in by having them butcher babies like Herod the Great's thugs do in the Matthean slaughter of the innocents. After that, why does anybody take anything Craig says seriously? I mean, I wouldn't even ask him what time it is or what day it was. He's like Jay Carney, right? It's just a spin that is counter spin. You're trying to euphemize everything, and you're just making it worse. Now, what does this have to do with the Syrophoenician woman? Well, it's interesting to me that Mark has that she's a Gentile and a Semite. She's Syrian and Phoenician, which is pretty much, related to the Philistines of the Old Testament. And she's a Gentile, and that's the point. But Matthew calls her a Canaanite at first. Now, what does that have to do with being either a Syrian, an Aramaean, as they're called in the Old Testament, or a Phoenician? They're not Canaanites. Well, he's just using a kind of a slur to say, you remember the people that were such a demon race like the orcs in Tolkien that God had to send his people in to slaughter them all? I mean, it's already a slur. And the same thing went on in the Old Testament when later on, long after the Canaanites are gone, they start calling the common people, the Am Haaretz, the people of the land, a term used for the Canaanites, the ones left in the land that they had to clear away. So these terms get reused, and they're always slurs, right? So for Matthew it is. Now, both versions of the story are arguments for the Gentile mission. Right, and they know that the story did not have Jesus going to Gentile territory to preach, and so what are they going to do? I mean, it's easy for Jewish Christians who oppose the Gentile mission, like the guys in Acts chapter 11, to say, look, we're only following what our Lord Jesus did. He didn't preach to Gentiles. Of course, that didn't mean they were consigning Gentiles to damnation, right? I think Joachim Jeremias is right in his book, Jesus' Promise to the Nations, that when he says that men will stream in from the east and the west to sit at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of God, that he's thinking of this thing in Micah and Isaiah that says in the last days that the nations will stream to Jerusalem to learn the ways of Yahweh and so on. It's like the idea was that with the Jewish Christians in all probability was not that, to hell with the Gentiles, but rather their turn will come. Once the great apocalyptic thing happens, it'll be pretty obvious who was right, and these guys will say, okay, we know what the true religion is now, sign us up, tell us about it. And I would think, I mean, we don't know, but it makes a lot of sense that would have been the view, right? I think we got to give them the benefit of the doubt on that. But this story of the Syrophoenician woman, which may be another telling of the centurion servant story from Q. It may have just changed in the telling, but both are healings at a distance on behalf of a Gentile who nonetheless comes to Jesus as seeking his help. Both are ways of saying, well, all right, Jesus didn't actually go to preach to Gentiles, but he's sort of doing it by remote control. Don't you see that the healing at a distance is the precedent for us going out into the same distance among the nations to give them the healing of the gospel? Sozo meant both save and heal. So it wouldn't have seemed like much of a stretch. And so as they stand, Mark and Matthew are saying, let's reach out to Gentiles. They're not saying to hell with the Gentiles. One wonders if before Mark, this was a piece of polemic from the Acts 11 guys, the Jewish Christians who didn't want a Gentile mission, and that it ended with Jesus saying, sorry, lady, you can't give away the food you prepared for your kids to their dogs, the house puppies. I mean, the pets really is the idea. You love them too, but your kids come first. That softens it a little bit. I know apologists say that and it sounds like spin, but I got to admit there's a bit of a point to that. It may be an unfortunate analogy, but it's a little difficult to picture the evangelists Mark and Matthew just being bigots about the Gentiles, since the point of the story is to say the gospel is going to be for them too. Now, okay, I'm sorry, I got off track here. You can speculate that the no gospel to the Gentiles people originated this story, and he simply turned her down. And the punchline was, you wouldn't give your kids food to their dogs instead, would you? So that it wasn't a miracle story, it was a pronouncement story, and it was against the Gentile mission. Then Mark, who was in favor of it, decided to have this reversal, having the woman say, aha, but, and then Jesus says, touche, all right, you made your point. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, but of course the only text we actually have is the Markan and Matthean one. Now let's take a fast look at what they say. Mark has the same thing we have in Acts and Romans. Let the children be satisfied first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. This Jews first and then the Gentiles. That's Mark. But what does Matthew have? It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. He has omitted the Jew first and then Gentile thing. And yet, still, so maybe he was less enthusiastic, or maybe this in itself is an example of how Matthew has gone through different stages, which it certainly has on other grounds. One wonder, just like there is a remnant, a vestige in Matthew from the no Gentile mission faction, the thing where Jesus in Matthew 10 says, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles or the Samaritans, but only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Well, we've got the lost sheep of the house of Israel added to the story by Matthew, and it may well have been another vestige of that, but just this Great Commission was added on to the end of Matthew's gospel in a later stage of redaction. It's possible that we have somebody adding more of Mark to it. But this gets complicated. Not that the facts aren't complicated sometimes. We don't have any facts. We've just got speculations. It could be that this is another case, as Arlo Now, NAU, points out in his great book, Peter in Matthew, that the first Matthean redactor chopped something from Mark, and the second Matthean redactor added it back. I think you can show that, as Now does on other points. This might be another one. So there is Matthean redaction of Mark. He likes Gentiles even less, and I'm guessing that even in Mark you had an original shorter version that was simply an anti-Gentile mission pronouncement story. This is a real good question. Much appreciated.